exemplify this. First, Homecoming, The Art and Life of William H. Johnson, published in 1999, Cutting a Figure, Fashioning Black Portraiture in 2008, Going There, Black Visual Satire in 2020, and Black Art, possibly the most read book, Black Art, A Cultural History, first published in 1997, that was republished recently in 2021. Among the exhibitions he curated, I would like to mention the Blues Aesthetic, Black Culture and Modernism, organized in 1989, Rhapsodies in Black, Art of the Harlem Renaissance in 1997, Back to Black, Art, Cinema and the Racial Imaginary in 2005, and Archibald Motley, Jazz Age Modernist in 2014. Tonight's lecture will be devoted to African American artists who came to Paris from mainly the New York area and the Harlem district. It will engage in conversation in the connection between Paris and the Harlem Renaissance, and it is called Nous Quatre à Paris, after a Motley painting, and through the characters and the important figures of Paul C. Hayden, Hale Woodruff, Archibald Motley, and Harold Douglas, it will engage in this conversation between Harlem and Paris. So thank you again, Richard, for accepting this lecture. We are honored to have you here tonight, and thank you for joining quite numbly tonight. Thank you. The ground is yours.
Merci beaucoup. I want to say bonsoir, but this light is so rich and vibrant. It's like daytime. This talk explores how Paris operated as the pivotal site and source of inspiration for four African American visual artists: Palmer C. Hayden, Hale Woodruff, Archibald J. Motley Jr., and Aaron Douglas. These encounters between a celebrated European capital and several American sojourners resulted in works that not only interfaced with the character and ambiance of the City of Light, but produced art that underscored the aesthetic confidence and liberatory spirit that Paris has historically engendered among the world's freedom seekers. Those of you who are immersed in the literature and culture of France know that the title of this lecture has been appropriated from Pierre Nora, his important book, Les Lieux de Mémoire, from 1886. What you may not know is that a very esteemed French scholar, Geneviève Fabre, and a very esteemed American scholar, Robert O'Meally, published a book in 1994 called History and Memory in African American Culture. And so I would say that today's presentation is both informed by Nora's idea of the power, the place, the site of memory, but also Geneviève Fabre and Robert O'Mealy's book, which pushed that idea and probed that idea within the African American context. Thinking about Geneviève Fabre and Robert O'Mealy's book, one can think about any number of sites of African American memory. I'm thinking of Congo Square in New Orleans. I'm thinking about Harlem, that community in New York that has been part of the cultural imaginary for many, many years. I'm also thinking about Washington, D.C. and the Mall, in particular Martin Luther King's historic speech, I Have a Dream, that was done in front of the Lincoln Memorial in 1963. But I'm also thinking of more contemporary sites of memory. For many of us in the African American community, the tragic murder of innocent African Americans at Emmanuel African Methodist Episcopal Church in Charleston, South Carolina, has made that church a site of memory, a site that we will never, never forget. On the other hand, African Americans have claimed Paris, multiple places in Paris, as sites of memory. Behind me, you're looking at a detail of a very, very fine painting by Henry Ossawa Tanner called The Seine, created in 1902. A work that this important African American artist produced, along with many other works that locate and place Paris in his galaxy of images and paintings that will usher in the 20th century. I don't have to show you images of Josephine Baker on the roof of the Théâtre des Champs-Élysées, or images of Sidney Bechet performing in various nightclubs here in Paris. They have made parts of this city sites of important memory. We can bring this into a contemporary context. I don't know if you saw many of these images in 2018, but the legendary contemporary artists Jay-Z and Beyonce made their way to the Louvre to be photographed in front of all of the great masterpieces there. So African Americans have grabbed a hold of Paris in their own way. Thinking about Sidney Bechet, where he is interred, as many of you know, in Père Lachaise, the cemetery here in Paris. All we need to do is look at great films by actors like Jean Moreau, and we hear the music of Miles Davis rolling through the soundtrack. Or more recently, we were driving through the Montmartre area, and there was a big billboard of Lenny Kravitz, who seems to be quite a celebrity here in Paris. But as I said, I want to park on a different moment. I want to look at the post-World War I period. I want to look at 4 artists in particular. And I will start with my first artist, Palmer C. Hayden, who was born Peyton Cole Hegeman in Whitewater, Virginia in 1890. And his career as an artist really didn't begin until he enlisted in the First World War, when he enrolled in a drawing correspondence course while in service. And his military duties took him to West Point, New York, and then to the Philippines. And upon being discharged, he devoted most of his time to painting marine subjects. And in 1926, he won a gold medal and a monetary award, which brought him to Paris, where he met other African American artists, including Henry Ossawa Tanner. And he returns to New York in 1931, but what one could argue is that those pivotal years, 26, 27, 28, 29, 30, were quite pivotal and helped form him as we know him. And here I'm showing you an image of him at an award ceremony in New York shortly after he returns. As an art historian, and those of you who attend art history lectures, you're more familiar with the technology of PowerPoint. But I love toys. I love art historical toys. And what I'm using today for you is StoryMap, which is a technology. It's a GIS technology which is oriented to the map, and the artwork follows. So on the right side of the screen, you will see an address, a location in Paris. And on the left, you'll see the images that are part of the conversation around that location. So our first location is Hotel Jeanne d'Arc, probably doesn't exist anymore. Cette, rue Vanneau, in the 7th. I've located it in Envalive, but maybe it's not quite exactly there. But this was Palmer Hayden's first residence in Paris. And he, again, received this money from the Harmon Foundation and quickly became a part of this lively scene of the mid-1920s. One of the paintings that probably came out of that moment, although created many, many years later, is this work, Fétiche et Fleurs, Fetish and Flowers. I was fortunate just an hour ago to be at Quai Branly, where I saw incredible sculptures from traditional cultures in West and Central Africa. And there's an incredible row of Fang mask on view at Quai Branly. I believe Palmer Hayden had access to all of these incredible artworks in Paris when he was here. Paris was the center of kind of an art market for African art objects. So perhaps a fang head like this or one similar to this was something that he saw. But he takes it beyond just a simple representation of a piece of African statuary. If you notice, he incorporates tiger lilies into the still life. He incorporates a piece of Kuba cloth from Central Africa. And he also incorporates an ashtray with a cigarette in it. And so, although this is a painting, we are engaging with our senses and we are imagining our senses, our multiple senses at work, the sense of smell and the atmosphere of the smoke that swirls around this Fang statue and these tiger lilies. Palmer Hayden documents his own life in Paris. And he, again, has money from the Harmon Foundation, but he finds himself using it and then needing more. And so there are lots of letters between him and the foundation saying, I need more money for food. I need more money for paint. We have a feeling that he was not only using the money for food and paint, but he was also having a really, really good time. So he does a portrait of himself. And it's this one, the lean years in Paris self-portrait. And it's kind of remarkable because Americans are quite conservative around the idea of the nude. And he has decided to do a portrait of himself shaving in a very kind of modest, meager situation. So it's an important work that really kind of places him and shows him as thinking ahead to the nude body, the self-nude body, as something that is art-worthy. He also is the sketcher. He's doing lots of sketches and also lots of paintings of himself and his friends. And his most famous work, well, first I want to go to this address, 11 Rue Rousselet. This was Palmer Hayden's second Paris residence. And we think around this time he has created probably his most famous and most controversial painting, Nous quatre à Paris, Our Four in Paris, which is the other part of the title of my lecture. And this is a work at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York. And some of you might know that there's a big Harlem Renaissance exhibition on view right now in New York. And the curator, Denise Morel, has done a fantastic job. But I recall vividly as she was organizing the show, she was saying, now, what about that Our Four in Paris? Do I really want to put that up? Will people really be able to understand and appreciate what Palmer Hayden has done? And I said no, but still you might want to put it up anyway, because it speaks to any number of ideas and sensibilities that are at work during this time period. I should really give you backdrop for this piece. First of all, Palmer Hayden loved to play cards. In fact, we think that he might have learned that great French game, is it called belote? Belote. And so he was playing belote, he was playing poker, and he was a part of a very vivid and vivacious community of other black artists, not just visual artists, but musicians and dancers and showbiz people and students. And they all gathered and played cards in the cafes and in various homes. And so this image by Palmer Hayden is I wouldn't call it a documentary work, but it's an image that reflects those fun times that they had playing cards. But I'm so glad I showed this right before Fétiche et Fleur, because you can see what he has done. He has taken that fang head, he has taken those images from Gabon, and he has translated them into bodies. One of my wonderful colleagues who's no longer with us, Patrine Archer-Straw, did a wonderful book some years ago called Negrophilia, where she talks about this painting, and she talks about Palmer Hayden having drunk the primitivism Kool-Aid. And what she meant by that is that Palmer Hayden is not afraid to delve into the outrageous, the absurd, the hilarious, the ridiculous, the problematic. But I would argue that he is in line with almost all the other major artists and writers and poets and dancers and musicians who are working during this same time period, creating performances like the Blackbirds. People often talk about La Negre, that very important performance that took place at the Champs-Élysées. But the Blackbird Review was also extremely important. These are photographs by Germaine Cruel, her images of some of the various entertainers and the like. And you probably are familiar with the very famous Paul Colin poster from this. But my point in talking about this in relationship to Notre Quatre à Paris is that, that artists during this time period are using the outrageousness, the absurdity, as a kind of a strategic, almost signifying element in their work. And also they're not afraid of humor and jokes and looking at themselves in kind of a playful and ironic way. So that work has that, all of that kind of working within it. As I said, Palmer Hayden was part of a large community. And one of the other, several of the other people who were here during this time period was the great poet County Cullen. And here he is with his very good friend, the librarian Harold Jackman. And we know they're in Paris. They bought their berets, and they are posing very elegantly on a veranda during this time period. Thanks to County Cullen, we have a fairly accurate record of this moment and of this time and all the people who are kind of working together and playing together. But I wanted to show you one of Palmer Hayden's cartoons. He was a voracious caricaturist. And this is one that he has that's kind of autobiographical, if you can read that. Votre billet ou l'argent, autrement aller au pays. Your ticket or money, otherwise take a walk. And then also there is Dame Fortune or Lady Luck. You know, j'entends toujours des mauvaises nouvelles de chez moi. I always wait for the bad news from home. Blues, hard times, Wall Street crash, no work, blues. Alors, je reste, so I stay. So Palmer Hayden, in those wonderful words, this kind of concrete poem, you know, gives us just in words and passages as well as with wonderful pictures. A kind of a synopsis of what his life was like. He was lucky, and he exhibited on Rue du Faubourg Saint-Honoré. He had a really important exhibition in 1920, in the early 1920s, at Gallery Bernheim Jean, and this is an important site in French art history. It moves to the Avenue Matignon at the corner of Rue du Faubourg Saint-Honoré. The premises were inaugurated by the French president Gaston Domègue on the occasion of the vernissage of masterpieces of the 19th and 20th century, and included in that exhibition was Cézanne and Seurat and Van Dongen, Gauguin, Matisse, Dufevre, Lamique, Modigliani, Utrio, and Renoir, and Hayden finds a way of having a show there as well. His exhibit is held for a very short time in November 1927. There are no reviews, but the French art critic Raymond Selig has discussed Hayden's work several months earlier in a review called La Revue du Vrai et du Beau. That was from 1927. What I'm showing you here is another watercolor by Hayden called Café L'Avenue, Café de l'Avenue. Again, made just on the end of his time here and moving back to New York. We think he's probably referring to the cafe at 190 Boulevard Haussmann, the Café L'Avenue there in the Opera section. What I love about this is that one really gets a sense of this kind of fusion of piano, violin, and meditation. You know, the thinker at work, musicians and poets and what have you. Not limiting himself to black subjects, I should add. This is another very interesting work from his sketchbook. It's called Moderne. And as we can see, we have Notre Dame in the distance, and this kind of multi-headed creature or multi-eyed octopus-like creature, all surrounded over the artist as he works assiduously at his easel, and with all sorts of little elements scattered hither and yonder. Palmer Hayden's, one of his key addresses was 16 Rue Blomet. And this is at the top of Montparnasse. And this Rue Blomet is legendary in African-American art history, not just for Palmer Hayden, but another artist who I'll talk about in a few minutes. But here we have Palmer Hayden's drawing of the famous Bal Nègre, or Bal Blomet, and he's showing us the various dancers and the couplings with the musicians on the side and around each of those characters. We had a wonderful screening of a film yesterday with the group that I'm here visiting with called Paris Noir. And there was this incredible Pathé film clips from one of these great clubs, which are not African-American clubs. They're clubs that featured people from Martinique, from Guadeloupe, from Senegal, from the French West Indies, and also French West Africa. And there was an incredible moment where we see these couples dancing, and there's all this, in the Caribbean, they call it winding. And we really saw the movements of the bodies as people are dancing with one another. We see that in this drawing by Palmer Hayden. And here we have Palmer Hayden back in New York, painting plein air, with the very famous artist Buford Delaney, who wasn't famous then, who had not visited Paris yet. He will come to Paris at the beginning of the 1950s. But we can see with his interaction with Palmer Hayden, beret in place, that's going to be a goal, that's going to be an objective, that's going to be a memory that's going to resonate and connect with him, with them. Actually. So my second artist is Hale Woodruff. And Hale Woodruff was born in Cairo, Illinois, but he grew up in Nashville, Tennessee. And in the early 20s, he studied at the John Herron Art Institute in Indianapolis, Indiana. In 26, this philanthropic organization that had supported Palmer Hayden will also support Hale Woodruff. And this will be a bronze medal and prize money, which will allow Hale to go to Paris. Woodruff spent several years not only in Paris, but in the south of France, where he experimented with various modern techniques. In 1931, Woodruff accepted a teaching position in Atlanta University and created the country's first fine arts department for Southern students at historically black institutions. But I want to park more on Hale Woodruff in Paris. And the first image I want to show, as you can see from the map, is Pont Neuf. Pont Neuf, right in the heart of Paris, right at the juncture between both banks. And his painting from that location is quite remarkable. It's very brushy. It's at a very interesting angle, which allows the architecture to kind of communicate and convey its particularities, its distinctions. But for me, what really makes this work sing are the colors. Colors that perhaps like the moment that we're currently in, the light hitting the stone in such a way as to create both shadows and highlights that animate the surfaces of these architectural structures. So much so that they are no longer static entities. They kind of vibrate and throb on their own. Hale Woodruff actually talks about Pont Neuf, and he says, Pont Neuf affords the artist an opportunity to use more than the familiar and customary grays. Its color was at first apparently a yellowish tan, and yet it plays an important part in its present color. Copperish greens, purples, and blues are also occasionally evident, though all of the colors change with the sun. Near the Pont Neuf, all along the walls of the quays are old as well as fresh smears of paint, where the artists have cleaned their palettes and brushes after doing the famous bridge. And I love that anecdote because he's reminding us not just of this as a site for doing a landscape, but it's a site where artists create, and that paint becomes a part of the story of that location, by the artists making work, but also by the artists cleaning their brushes. Hale actually writes about his time in Paris for the Indianapolis Star. And I've got a clip here of the Indianapolis Star, and this is an article that he has written, Local Negro Artist Tells a View from Notre Dame. And we see his picture in the lower right-hand corner. So artists are not just enjoying themselves and making their art, but they're documenting and telling their stories to the world. So I have another address for you, 41 rue l'École, in the 15th. This is Hale Woodruff's first address in Paris, and it afforded him a chance to really spend a lot of time in Montparnasse. And in the archives of American art, interestingly, not in Hale Woodruff's papers, but in Palmer Hayden's papers, is this sketch, Le Chat du Dôme. So again, I find it intriguing that we find this image in another artist's papers, so it speaks to this kind of community and this interaction, and we see these cats, these feral cats kind of moving and finding a home where they can get a little piece of bread and love. Another really great location that Hale creates for us is Le Carrousel de Paris from also 1927. As Parisians know, not the Arc of Triomphe, but rather the arc that's in proximity to the Louvre. And we can tell that again, not only is Hale a colorist, but he's been taking some impressionist lessons or some post-impressionist lessons with how the brush and how the paint is applied, and so that we don't really get details, we get effects, we get impressions that give us the feeling of light at a particular time of day. So I'm back to cards. And a painting that Hale does that is also owned by the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York is called The Card Players. And as you can tell, he has moved in this work way beyond the Impressionists. He says, okay, I can do that Cubist thing as well. And with his Cubism, we have something that's really, really radical, where perspectives and placement of things like bodies and furniture and cards and bottles and flowers have been totally kind of relocated and resituated. The table has been lifted up. You know, our figures, very similar in some ways to those fang heads that we saw in Quatre à Paris. But done in a much more severe and radically stylistic way of these two bodies. And even the bodies themselves have become wedges and shapes and forms. I love how the table echoes the shoulders, which echo the game that's in the back, the checkerboard game, and that echo the cards themselves. So that it's almost as if the card table is itself a kind of a game, a map, a risk, a play that Hale Woodruff has engaged with. At the Met, they often place this work in relationship to, of course, Cézanne's great card players. But I would argue that Hale Woodruff has moved way beyond Paul Cézanne in a work like this, that he's really kind of making a much more radical statement. On the other hand, I think that we're also here in the world of signification. In other words, looking at something that's been done that's a classic, important, modern work of art, but saying, I can do my own thing as related to that. So the address is, I don't have a number, but it used to be Rue du Douanier, and now it is Rue Georges Braque. And it is the home of a couple, an American couple, Stephen Green, photographed by Man Ray, and Sophie Victor Green. And Victor and Sophie lived on this street. We have the address, the contemporary address, thanks to story maps on the right. And they were the host of all sorts of people in Paris during that time period. As you can tell, the portraits are done by Man Ray. So they were part of this very lively avant-garde scene in Paris. But they actually had a big enough home that housed County Cullen on numerous occasions. He often talks about his friends, Stephen and Sophie. And I'm always intrigued that something as simple as having an African-American house guest is no big deal in Paris. But had they been in the United States, that might have caused a little bit more controversy. It might have been something that the neighbors would have objected to. So there was a kind of a freedom and the ability to interact and engage across racial boundaries here that are kind of built into this story of places of memory. So the clubs were not just, in at the clubs, particularly for the Caribbean clubs, were not just on Rue Blomet. The other location was Rue Vavin, and the club there was called La Boule Blanche. And Hale Woodruff does a painting called The Banjo Player. And I've been thinking a lot about banjos lately. The talk that I heard yesterday at a book club, at a bookstore in the 20th arrondissement was about Claude McKay's great novel, Banjo. And as the speaker was talking about banjo, it dawned on me, this banjo is just popping up all over the place. We have Hale Woodruff's banjo from 1927. And I'm not showing you, but we have a very, very important painting by Henry Ossawa Tanner done in 1893 called The Banjo Lesson. And so this icon of minstrelsy, this icon of ridicule, at least in the American context, has been retooled and refashioned and rethought. But it's particularly fascinating in a French context. And I have to say that when I first saw this image, the banjo player, I was thinking, okay, he's thinking about America. He's thinking about the South. He's thinking about minstrelsy. But then I began to do research on La Boule Blanche and all of these clubs, and I realized that there were these Martinican and Haitian and Guadeloupean musicians who were using the banjo like jazz musicians and blues musicians were using the banjo, although they were doing different kinds of music. Here's a photograph by Brassai of Haitians, a Haitian group. So now that I look at these works, I have a new understanding of that real strong interconnection across the black diaspora, between African Americans and people from the Caribbean, as well as from West and Central Africa. And that manifesting itself in the artworks. So our third artist is Archibald Motley. Who was born in New Orleans, Louisiana in 1891, but his family moves to Chicago when he's quite young, and he becomes really one of the pioneer African-American artists to exhibit at the Art Institute and to study at the Art Institute of Chicago. His training there was academic, but by the early mid-1920s, he has become a bold and highly original modernist and one of the leading painters of the Harlem Renaissance, although it's not Harlem, it's Chicago where he's working, and a great visual chronicler of 20th century American life. In 27, he gets a Guggenheim, and he was unsuccessful, but in 29, he gets a Guggenheim Fellowship and he's successful, and that allows him to move to Paris. And he's here for just 1 year. But interestingly, like Woodruff, who spent more time here, and Palmer Hayden, who spent more time here, Archibald Motley really absorbs in that year so much about Paris. So our first address for Motley is 16 Rue Simon Dereux in Montmartre. So in some ways, he's following the jazz musicians and the art. I mean, those early jazz bands all were located in the Montmartre section, and that's where he's located as well. His first residence was at the hotel. Actually, his first residence was actually in this arrondissement on Campagne Première. But he realizes that he can get a better space, a much bigger space, and he on the right bank. And so he gets this address at Rue Simon Dereux. And so I'm showing you a picture here called Dans la Rue, Paris. But I can't help but think that perhaps this image is very much reflective of Montmartre in terms of the tall buildings there, in terms of the cobblestones and the street life that takes place there. And of course, this is a really important location in Parisian history as well as in art history in general. Despite being in the shadows of Saint Pierre de Montmartre, Motley's studio was really new. It was completed in 1927. He moved into an almost new location with all modern conveniences, including hot water and electric lighting. He lived on the second story and made notes of the size of each room. In other words, he did research and he documents his own location. The ceilings were quite high, 11 feet high. The bathroom was 11 by 5. The bedroom was 10 by 13, and the kitchen was 15 by 13. So he's really, kind of showing us, all the details. And of course, one of the other great places in Montmartre is this club or bar or cafe, Au Rêve. And we don't know exactly if this is Au Rêve, but when I look at a picture of the place that I got off of Google, I'm looking at those windows, and those windows really do kind of almost reflect and resemble some of the architecture that we're seeing that Motley has created here for us at 89 Rue Carencourt. And so while Motley is living up in Montmartre, he is definitely spending a lot of time here in Montparnasse. And this painting called Les Jockeys, or the Jockey Club, is currently at the Schomburg Center for Research in Black Culture in New York City. And it's a remarkable painting. He continues to come to Montparnasse for pleasure, for night clubbing, to buy his art materials, his canvases, his stretchers. And he took advantage of the Marcadet Vavin Metro, which was a direct line between Montmartre and Montparnasse. He spent time at all the cafes, the Coupole, the Cosmo, the Chameleon, and again, the Jockey. It was in this period that he too makes these connections across the diasporic realm with people from Haiti, with people from Africa, with people from the Caribbean. And this painting shows us, well, I'll show you the photograph. This is an old postcard to show you how close Motley's painting is of this very, very famous address. This was a place that was owned by a jockey, an American jockey, hence the name Le Jockey. And his name was Neil Miller. And as you can see, he wanted everybody to know that this was an American location. So he's got American Indians and cowboys painted on the side of the building. And remarkably, Archibald Motley documents and captures those same images in his painting. In fact, I don't know if there are any other paintings of Le Jockey other than this work by Archibald Motley. I love also the ambience, the people, the gendarme, the poster, the car, the little squiggly dog in the center of the picture. It really kind of captures, again, a mood. As I said, Motley is spending time and often using models from the African and Caribbean community. And one of his models is this young man. It's just simply titled Senegalese Boy. As we can see, quite a beautiful and thought-provoking, contemplative image of this young man. Motley's most famous painting is of La Balle Nègre, this address, 33 Rue Blomet. This is a place that was apparently legendary during its time for people from the Caribbean, a place to dance, a place to meet and discuss and debate ideas relevant to members of the French colonies, Martiniquais, Guadeloupeans, Guyanese, Haitians, Africans, etc. In October, Roger Valin writes in Paris Soir newspaper, he describes this place as, when it comes time for the quadrille, things go far beyond dance. A rite or ceremony unfolds. The kind of sacred orgy in which all nationalities commune in a spirit of wild enthusiasm characteristic of southern climes. And Robert Desnos, the surrealist, describes Bal Blomet as a real Negro ball where everything is Negro, the musicians and the dancers, and where you can spend on Saturday and Sunday an evening very far from the Parisian atmosphere among the lively Martinicans and the dreamy Guadeloupeans. But let's look at how Motley takes on that same idea. What he does, first of all, is he's almost like a camera, and he has cropped more views and elements so that we really get a centralized part of this story of Bal Negre. So at the top, we just see the bottoms of people's bodies. We see wine bottles and glasses. To the sides, we see parts of human bodies. So he's almost, as I said, there's a camera-like quality in how he has edited and framed these people. On the other hand, there's also some very implicit rhythmizing in this work. If we look to the left, we have the clarinet player and the guitar basically in the same pose. If we look at the couples in the middle, they're basically in the same pose with some variations. What I'm suggesting to you is that Motley has purposefully incorporated a kind of a rhythm and energy and patterning in the picture to try to invoke the kinds of energies and sounds and rhythms that one experiences on the dance floor. And of course, the irony of all ironies is that he calls this painting blues, which would make one think of Harlem or Chicago, his native hometown. But here he's making a statement. He's saying that La Bal Negre, or Bal Blomé, this Caribbean place, has these connections with a Black American art form known as the blues. So he's really making a great leap of faith for us. But he, I think, achieves that and realizes that through these delightful bodies. And also these wonderful anecdotes. The woman with the cigarette behind the gentleman. The pearl necklaces that barely pop up from behind the arm. And the ultimate fetish, the foot in the lower right-hand corner. This is pre-Louboutin, this foot that just kind of has its own independence between the legs of an individual. I mean, this is a collage sensibility without being a collage. I mean, he's thinking of fractured parts and pieces, but putting it into a very understandable mise en scène. And of course, we all know the famous Versailles photographs of La Bal Negre. I want to finish with Aaron Douglas, who is our fourth in Paris. And people often don't think about Aaron Douglas in Paris because he is truly the iconic artist of the Harlem Renaissance in New York. He was born in Kansas, and he studies in Nebraska. He gets a degree in 1922. But word about his talent as a young artist gets all the way to New York City. And several figures in New York encourage him and egg him on to come to New York to be a part of this thing that's going to be called the New Negro. So he arrives in 1925, and he studies with the very important German designer Ville Lumière, and he develops his own style, his own kind of technique. So here we have a very young and dapper Aaron Douglas. This is a photograph of him in Carl van Vechten's home. Van Vechten, a very important figure during the Harlem Renaissance. And we see one of Aaron Douglas's murals behind him on the wall of Carl van Vechten's home. And I love how he's doing the kind of side eye, and we get this very classic 1930s suit with the wide lapels and the double-breasted body, and then the body akimbo, just kind of a little contrapposto to give him some style, to give him some elegance. He too discovers Montparnasse, and his first location is Rue des Écoles des Médecins, and that's right here in the heart of the left bank and the art world. And I'm showing you an image of his entitled Charleston. And Charleston is one of several illustrations that Aaron Douglas did for a publication that was first written in Paris, in France, called Magie Noire. And it was later translated into English called Black Magic by Paul Morin. And Paul Morin was a surrealist of sorts, and he writes this book about what you might call le tumult noir, the black invasion into Europe of black culture. And one of the stories has to do with jazz musicians who unfortunately are encountering Southern whites from the United States who object, who are hostile to the freedom that these black men, these black musicians have. And so this image shows the anger on the parts of these whites that have been stylized in the lower right-hand corner with Aaron Douglas's silhouetted style. This woman who appears to be quite seductive, and then the musicians playing, but clearly conscious of everything that's around them. And then these two sinister elements, the silhouette of a noose, and then also the silhouette of these kind of hands, these claw-like hands. So Aaron Douglas has mastered this illustrative kind of approach to image making, which is why he becomes the go-to artist for Langston Hughes, for Claude McKay, for Carl Van Vechten, for James Weldon Johnson. So many of these images are paintings, but they were ultimately reproduced in books. This one in particular is at the North Carolina Museum of Art, I believe. This is a great photograph of Aaron Douglas. He's doing that obligatory pose right in front of the old Louvre. I guess he's standing where the pyramid is now, which is quite poetic too, because Aaron Douglas was very much a transmitter of ancient Africa and making that a modern statement. But in lieu of the pyramid, we have him. Two-tone shoes, that same jacket, cigarette in hand. Rouchampollyon was the address of another location where Aaron Douglas stays at a certain moment. But as you can see, he is almost like a chameleon. He does very, very stylized works like Charleston, but he also does things that are perhaps more impressionistic, as in this Paris street scene that we have yet to identify exactly where it is. He was a student at one point at l'Académie Scandinave, and here is a postcard of that, one of the vintage postcards from that era. As many of the African American artists, they had studied in the US, but they wanted to take advantage of the great learning that they could have in Paris. So this was among many places where artists found themselves an opportunity to study and perfect their skills. I wanted to draw your attention to an interesting illustration that Aaron Douglas does for a journal called La Revue de Montnoy. The offices were located at 45 Rue Jacob, also in this area, Saint-Germain-des-Prés generally. And the journal was a journal that was published by two Martinican women, Paulette Nadal and Jean Nadal. They had a kind of a salon here in the Paris and in the suburbs. And they brought intellectuals and artists of all sorts to their home to discuss current ideas and issues. And clearly Aaron Douglas was a part of their world. This is an image that was published in La Revue de Montnoy called Forge Foundry. And it's done in his kind of classic style, these silhouettes. But even with the elements of silhouette, he's able to tell us a story of black labor, a story of working conditions which aren't necessarily ideal, with smoke and environmental hazards surrounding one. But we're also seeing a kind of a sense of strength and Vulcan-like power on the parts of these workers. But then, as is always the case with Aaron Douglas, we have this environment which again incorporates this kind of energy, this kind of light, these gradations which give us the effect of light coming through the trees or coming through the clouds, but done in a very stylized, I call it Afro-Deco way. That on one hand is in conversation with this wonderful world of modern design and art of the 20s and early 30s, but also reflects his interest in how those ideas might resonate with an African American story. But I digress a bit because one of the founders of La Revue du Monde Noir is Jean Nardal, who is perhaps not as well known as Paulette Nardal. Paulette was kind of the engine behind La Revue du Monde Noir, but Jean seems to have been a kind of a source of inspiration for any number of people. This is a painting that Lois Mailou Jones did of Jean in the later 1930s. I'm intrigued with how Lois gives us something that's very straight ahead as a representational portrait, but again, stylization takes place where we get these bands that are evocative of textiles, but also chroma of skin coloration. And the image, if we have seen images of Jean or Jane Nardal, it's very, very close to how she actually appears. Aaron Douglas was here during the very famous Exposition Coloniale Internationale that took place on Daumesnil Avenue in the Bois de Vincennes. I have a fond spot in my heart for this part of Paris. When I came here as a graduate student in the 1980s, this was when the Musée des Arts Africains et Oceaniens was still that institution. Now it is the Museum of Immigration. But I remember going there and just being moved by, again, this incredible Art Deco, Afro-Deco creation. These wonderful buildings with reliefs that were evocative of the colonies, stylized bodies from Africa, Indonesia, Latin America, etc. This is a poster from the exposition. And Aaron Douglas is a witness to that. And that's 1931. In 1934, he creates this very important series of paintings that's at the Schomburg Center for Research in Black Culture called Aspects of Negro Life. And I'm just showing you one of the 4 panels. This is Aspects of Negro Life, the Negro in an African Setting. I can't help but believe that it was through his time in Paris, and especially encountering the designs and vivid imagery from the Exposition Coloniale, that he comes back to New York and continues with this technique that he's doing, but increasingly finding ways of how to tell this broad story, this diasporic story that will move from Africa to the Americas, that will move from slavery to freedom, that will traverse struggle to kind of the newness of the 20th century. This image by Douglas, if you look at the back, we have these heads which are somewhat reminiscent of the Mangbetu headdresses that one will find in Central Africa. And these were people who very much were on display and being seen during the colonial exposition. But as you can see with Aaron Douglas's work, he in this style, he goes away from a naturalism. He steps away from representationalism, and we get this stylized, episodic, almost semiotic kind of representation of Africa and rhythm and energy. Another sidebar for Aaron Douglas, which I've always found fascinating, is that he was very much a devotee of Gurdjieff, the Armenian mystic. And he had studied with Gurdjieff in New York in the 1920s. And for those of you who know this character from the 20s and 30s, he had these ideas about energy, about the sun, le soleil, and the power of the environment to impact and affect how we operate and move through the world. And so when I look at works like this, I think that not only is Aaron Douglas kind of telling this broader African-American epic, but he's tying it into something that's spiritual, something that's mystical, something that cannot be easily codified or written down in a conventional way. It can be written down, but he prefers to deal with it in this much more poetic and stylized way. So that's the end of my maps, but I want to end on another note. And the note that I want to end on is that the story I've told you is nous quatre à Paris, but there's another four that perhaps would tell another story, and I'm thinking in particular of four African-American women: Lois Mailou Jones, Elizabeth Prophet, Gwendolyn Bennett, and the fourth is Augusta Savage. And they were here during the same time period. And if I had more time, if I had another hour, I could tell you an entirely different but related story about what it means to be an African-American woman in Paris during that same time period. But that will be for another visit. Merci beaucoup.